The Dawnbreakers, Neville's narrative, recorded for the handicapped, tape 11. When Mirza Qurban Ali was arrested and brought before the Amir Nizam, a commotion such as Tehran had rarely experienced was raised. Large crowds of people thronged the approaches to the headquarters of the government, eager to learn what would befall him. Since last night, the Amir, as soon as he had seen him, remarked, "I have been besieged by all classes of state officials who have vigorously interceded in your behalf." A footnote here says, Mirza Qurban Ali was famous amongst mystics and dervishes, and had many friends and disciples in Tehran, besides being well known to most of the nobles and chief men, and even to the Shah's mother. She, because of her friendship for him, and the compassion she felt for his plight, said to His Majesty the King, "He is no Babi, but has been falsely accused." So they sent and brought him out, saying, "Thou art a dervish, a scholar, and a man of learning. Thou dost not belong to this misguided sect. A false charge has been preferred against thee." He replied, "I reckon myself one of the followers and servants of His Holiness, though whether or no he hath accepted me as such, I wot not." When they continued to persuade him, holding out hopes of a pension and salary, he said, "This life and these drops of blood of mine are but of small account. Were the empire of the world mine, and had I 1,000 lives, I would freely cast them all at the feet of His friends. To sacrifice the head for the beloved, in mine eyes appears an easy thing indeed. Close thy lips and cease to speak of mediation, for of mediation lovers have no need." So at length they desisted in despair, and signified that he should die. From the Tarikh-i-Jadid, page 254. The Amir continued, "From what I learn of the position you occupy and the influence your words exercise, you are not much inferior to the Sayyid-i-Bab himself. Had you claimed for yourself the position of leadership, better would it have been than to declare your allegiance to one who is certainly inferior to you in knowledge." "The knowledge which I have acquired," he boldly retorted, "has led me to bow down in allegiance before him whom I have recognized to be my lord and leader. Ever since I attained the age of manhood, I have regarded justice and fairness as the ruling motives of my life. I have judged him fairly, and have reached the conclusion that should this youth, whose transcendent power friend and foe alike testify be false, every prophet of God, from time immemorial down to the present day, should be denounced as the very embodiment of falsehood. I am assured of the unquestioning devotion of over 1,000 admirers, and yet I am powerless to change the heart of the least among them. This youth, however, has proved himself capable of transmuting through the elixir of his love the souls of the most degraded among his fellow men. Upon 1,000 like me he has, unaided and alone, exerted such influence that without even attaining his presence, they have flung aside their own desires and have clung passionately to his will. Fully conscious of the inadequacy of the sacrifice they have made, these yearn to lay down their lives for his sake, in the hope that this further evidence of their devotion may be worthy of mention in his court." "I am loath," the Amir Nizam remarked, "whether your words be of God or not, to pronounce the sentence of death against the possessor of so exalted a station." "Why hesitate?" burst forth the impatient victim. "Are you not aware that all names descend from heaven? He whose name is Ali, in whose path I am laying down my life, has from time immemorial inscribed my name Qurban Ali in the scroll of his chosen martyrs. This is indeed the day on which I celebrate the Qurban festival, the day on which I shall seal with my life-blood my faith in his cause. Be not therefore reluctant, and rest assured that I shall never blame you for your act. The sooner you strike off my head, the greater will be my gratitude to you." Two footnotes here. On he whose name is Ali, it says this is a reference to the Bab, and Qurban Ali. Qurban means sacrifice, hence sacrifice for the Bab. "Take him away from this place," cried the Amir. "Another moment, and this dervish will have cast his spell over me." "You are proof against that magic," Mirza Qurban Ali replied, "that can captivate only the pure in heart. You and your like can never be made to realize the entrancing power of that divine elixir which, swift as the twinkling of an eye, transmutes the souls of men. Exasperated by the reply, the Amir Nizam arose from his seat and, his whole frame shaking with anger, exclaimed, "Nothing but the edge of the sword can silence the voice of this deluded people." "No need," he told the executioners, who were in attendance upon him, "to bring any more members of this hateful sect before me. Words are powerless to overcome their unswerving obstinacy. Whomever you are able to induce to recant his faith, release him. As for the rest, strike off their heads." As he drew near the sentence of his death, Mirza Qurban Ali, intoxicated with the prospect of an approaching reunion with his beloved, broke forth into expressions of joyous exultation. "Hasten to slay me," he cried with rapturous delight, "for through this death you will have offered me the chalice of everlasting life. Though my withered breath you now extinguish, with a myriad lives will my beloved reward me, lives such as no mortal heart can conceive. Hearken to my words, you who profess to be the followers of the Apostle of God," he pleaded as he turned his gaze to the concourse of spectators. "Muhammad, the day star of divine guidance, who in a former age arose above the horizon of Hijaz, has today, in the person of Ali Muhammad, again risen from the day spring of Shiraz, shedding the same radiance and imparting the same warmth. A rose is a rose in whichever garden, and at whatever time it may bloom." Seeing on every side how the people were deaf to his call, he cried aloud, "Oh, the perversity of this generation! How heedless of the fragrance which that imperishable rose has shed! Though my soul brim over with ecstasy, I can, alas, find no heart to share with me its charm, nor mind to apprehend its glory." At the sight of the body of Haji Mirza Syed Ali, beheaded and bleeding at his feet, his fevered excitement rose to its highest pitch. "Hail!" he shouted as he flung himself upon it. "Hail the day of mutual rejoicing, the day of our reunion with our beloved! Approach," he cried to the executioner as he held the body in his arms, "and strike your blow, for my faithful comrade is unwilling to release himself from my embrace, and calls me to hasten together with him to the court of the well-beloved." A blow from the executioner fell immediately upon the nape of his neck. A few moments later, and the soul of that great man had passed away. That cruel stroke stirred in the bystanders feelings of mingled indignation and sympathy. Cries of sorrow and lamentation ascended from the hearts of the multitude, and provoked a distress that was reminiscent of the outbursts of grief with which every year the populace greets the day of Ashura. A footnote of this says, "When he was brought to the foot of the execution pole, the headsman raised the sword and smote him on the neck from behind. The blow only bowed his head and caused the dervish's turban, which he wore, to roll some paces from him on the ground. Immediately, as it were with his last breath, he sent a fresh pang through the heart of everyone capable of emotion by reciting these verses: Happy he whom love's intoxication so hath overcome that scarce he knows whether at the feet of the beloved it be head or turban which he throws. From the Tariq-i-Jadid, pages 254 to 255. Number 3. Then came the turn of Haji Mullah Ismail Irkuni, who was a native of Farahan. In his early youth he departed for Karbala in quest of the truth which he was diligently striving to discover. He had associated with all the leading ulamas of Najaf and Karbala, had sat at the feet of Sayyid Qasim, and had acquired from him the knowledge and understanding which enabled him a few years later, when in Shiraz, to acknowledge the revelation of the Bab. He distinguished himself by the tenacity of his faith and the fervour of his devotion. As soon as the injunction of the Bab, bidding his followers to hasten to Khorasan, reached him, he enthusiastically responded, joined the companions who were proceeding to Badasht, and there received the appellation of Sirul Wujud. Whilst in their company, his understanding of the cause grew deeper, and his zeal for its promotion correspondingly increased. He grew to be the very embodiment of detachment, and felt more and more impatient to demonstrate in a befitting manner the spirit with which his faith had inspired him. in the exposition of the meaning of the verses of the Koran and the traditions of Islam, he displayed an insight which few could rival, and the eloquence with which he set forth those truths won him the admiration of his fellow disciples. In the days when the fort of Tabasi had become the rallying centre for the disciples of the Bab, he languished, disconsolate upon a sick bed, unable to lend his assistance and play his part for its defence. No sooner had he recovered than, finding that the memorable siege had ended with the massacre of his fellow disciples, he arose with added determination to make up by his self-sacrificing labours for the loss which the cause had sustained. That determination carried him eventually to the field of martyrdom and won him its crown. Conducted to the block and waiting for the moment of his execution, he turned his gaze towards those twin martyrs who had preceded him and who still lay entwined in each other's embrace. "Well done, beloved companions," he cried as he fixed his gaze upon their gory heads. "You have turned Tehran into a paradise. Would that I had preceded you." Drawing from his pocket a coin which he handed to his executioner, he begged him to purchase for him something with which he could sweeten his mouth. He took some of it and gave the rest to him, saying, "I have forgiven you your act. Approach and deal your blow. For 30 years I have yearned to witness this blessed day, and was fearful lest I should carry this wish with me unfulfilled to the grave. Accept me, O my God," he cried, as he turned his eyes to heaven, "unworthy though I be, and deign to inscribe my name upon the scroll of those immortals who have laid down their lives on the altar of sacrifice." He was still offering his devotions when the executioner, at his request, suddenly cut short his prayer. Number 4. He had hardly expired when Syed Hussein-i Torshizi, the Mujtahid, was conducted in his turn to the block. He was a native of Turshiz, a village in Khorasan, and was highly esteemed for his piety and rectitude of conduct. He had studied for a number of years in Najaf, and was commissioned by his fellow Mujtahids to proceed to Khorasan and there propagate the principles he had been taught. When he arrived in Qazimain, he met Haji Muhammad Taqi-i Kirmani, an old acquaintance of his who ranked among the foremost merchants of Kirman, and who had opened a branch of his business in Khorasan. As he was on his way to Persia, he decided to accompany him. This Haji Muhammad Taqi had been a close friend of Haji Mirza Syed Ali, the Bab's maternal uncle, through whom he had been converted to the cause in the year A8 1264, AD 1847-8, while preparing to leave Shiraz on a pilgrimage to Karbala. When informed of the projected journey of Haji Mirza Syed Ali to Shirik for the purpose of visiting the Bab, he expressed his eager desire to accompany him. Haji Mirza Syed Ali advised him to carry out his original purpose and proceed to Karbala and there await his letter, which would inform him whether it would be advisable to join him. From Shirik, Haji Mirza Syed Ali was ordered to depart for Tehran, in the hope that after a short stay in the capital he would be able to renew his visit to his nephew. Whilst in Shirik, he expressed his reluctance to return to Shiraz, inasmuch as he could no longer endure the increasing arrogance of its inhabitants. Upon his arrival in Tehran, he requested Haji Muhammad Taqi to join him. Syed Hussein accompanied him from Baghdad to the capital, and through him was converted to the faith. As he faced the multitude that had gathered round him to witness his martyrdom, Syed Hussein raised his voice and said, "Hear me, O followers of Islam. My name is Hussein, and I am a descendant of the Sayyidush Shuhada, who also bore that name." A footnote here says the Imam Hussein. The Mujtahids of the holy cities of Najaf and Karbala have unanimously testified to my position as the authorized expounder of the law and teachings of their faith. Not until recently had I heard the name of the Sayyidi Bab. The mastery I have obtained over the intricacies of the Islamic teachings has enabled me to appreciate the value of the message which the Sayyidi Bab has brought. I am convinced that were I to deny the truth which he has revealed, I should, by this very act, have renounced my allegiance to every revelation that has preceded it. I appeal to every one of you to call upon the ulamas and mushtahits of this city, and to convene a gathering at which I will undertake in their presence to establish the truth of this cause. Let them then judge whether I am able to demonstrate the validity of the claims advanced by the Bab. If they be satisfied with the proofs which I shall adduce in support of my argument, let them desist from shedding the blood of the innocent. And if I fail, let them inflict upon me the punishment I deserve." These words had scarcely dropped from his lips when an officer in the service of the Amir Nizam haughtily interjected, "I carry with me your death warrant, signed and sealed by 7 of the recognized mushtahits of Tehran, who have in their own handwriting pronounced you an infidel. I will myself be answerable to God on the day of judgment for your blood, and will lay the responsibility upon those leaders in whose judgments we have been asked to put our trust, and whose decisions we have been compelled to submit." With these words he drew out his dagger and stabbed him with such force that he immediately fell dead at his feet. Number 5. Soon after, Haji Muhammad Taqi-i Kirmani was led to the scene of execution. The ghastliness of the sight he beheld provoked his violent indignation. "Approach, you wretched and heartless tyrant!" he burst forth as he turned to his persecutor, "and hasten to slay me, for I am impatient to join my beloved Hussein. To live after him is a torture I cannot endure." 6. No sooner had Haji Muhammad Taqi uttered these words than Syed Murtada, who was one of the noted merchants of Zanjan, hastened to take precedence of his companions. He flung himself over the body of Haji Muhammad Taqi and pleaded that, being a Syed, his martyrdom would be more meritorious in the sight of God than that of Haji Muhammad Taqi. As the executioner unsheathed his sword, Syed Murtaza invoked the memory of his martyred brother who had struggled side by side with Mullah Hussein, and such were the references the onlookers marveled at the unyielding tenacity of the faith with which he was inspired. 7. In the midst of the turmoil which the stirring words of Syed Murtaza had raised, Muhammad Hussein-i Muraghi rushed forward and begged that he be allowed to be martyred immediately ere his companions were put to the sword. As soon as his eyes fell upon the body of Haji Mullah Ismail-i Qumi, for whom he entertained a deep affection, he impulsively threw himself upon him, and holding him in his embrace exclaimed, "Never will I consent to separate myself from my dearly beloved friend, in whom I have reposed the utmost confidence, and from whom I have received so many evidences of a sincere and deep-felt affection." Their eagerness to precede one another in laying down their lives for the faith astonished the multitude, who wondered which of the 3 would be preferred to his companions. They pleaded with such fervor that eventually they were beheaded, all 3 at one and the same moment. So great a faith, such evidences of unbridled cruelty, human eye has rarely beheld. Few as they were in number, yet when we recall the circumstances of their martyrdom, we are compelled to acknowledge the stupendous character of that force which could evoke so rare a spirit of self-sacrifice. When we remember the exalted rank these victims had occupied, when we observe the degree of their renunciation and the vitality of their faith, when we recall the pressure which from influential quarters had been exerted to avert the danger with which their lives were threatened, above all, when we picture to our minds the spirit that defied the atrocities which a heartless enemy so far bemeaned themselves as to inflict upon them, we are compelled to look upon that episode as one of the most tragic occurrences in the annals of this cause. At this stage of my narrative, I was privileged to submit to Baha'u'llah such sections of my work as I had already revised and completed. How abundantly have my labors been rewarded by him whose favor alone I seek, and for whose satisfaction I have addressed myself to this task. He graciously summoned me to his presence and vouchsafed me his blessings. I was in my home in the prison city of Akka, and lived in the neighborhood of the home of Ake-i Kalim, when the summons of my beloved reached me. That day, the 7th of the month of Rabi'u Thani, in the year AH 1306, the 11th of December AD 1888, I shall never forget. I here reproduce the gist of his words to me on that memorable occasion. In a tablet which we yesterday revealed, we have explained the meaning of the words, "Turn your eyes away," in the course of our reference to the circumstances attending the gathering at Badasht. And a footnote to "turn your eyes away." According to Islamic traditions, Fatimi, Muhammad's daughter, will appear unveiled as she crosses the bridge Sirat on the Day of Judgment. At her appearance, a voice from heaven will declare, "Turn your eyes away, O concourse of people." To continue to Baha'u'llah's tablet. We were celebrating, in the company of a number of distinguished notables, the nuptials of one of the princes of royal blood in Tehran, when Syed Ahmad-i-Yazdi, father of Syed Hussein, the Bab's amanuensis, appeared suddenly at the door. He beckoned to us, and seemed to be the bearer of an important message, which he wished immediately to deliver. We were, however, unable at that moment to leave the gathering, and motioned to him to wait. When the meeting had dispersed, he informed us that Tahiri had been placed in strict confinement in Qazvin, and that her life was in grave danger. We immediately summoned Muhammad Hadi-i Farhadi, and gave him the necessary directions to release her from her captivity and escort her to the capital. As the enemy had seized our house, we were unable to accommodate her indefinitely in our home. Accordingly, we arranged for her transference from our house to that of the Minister of War, who in those days had been disgraced by his sovereign and had been deported to Kashan. A footnote here of the Minister of War says, Mirza Akar Khan-i-Nuri, who succeeded the Amir Nizam as Grand Vizier of Naziruddin Shah. Back to Baha'u'llah's tablet. We requested his sister, who still was numbered among our friends, to act as hostess for Tahiri. She remained in her company until the call of the Bab, bidding us proceed to Khorasan, reached our ears. We decided that Tahiri should proceed immediately to that province, and commissioned Mirza to conduct her to a place outside the gate of the city, and from thence to any locality he deemed advisable in that neighborhood. And a footnote here of Mirza says, Ake-i Kalim, brother of Baha'u'llah. She was taken to an orchard in the vicinity of which was a deserted building, where they found an old man who acted as its caretaker. Mirza Musa returned and informed us of the reception which had been accorded to them, and highly praised the beauty of the surrounding landscape. We subsequently arranged for her departure to Khorasan, and promised that we would follow within the space of a few days. We soon joined her at Badasht, where we rented a garden for her use, and appointed the same Muhammad Hadi, who had achieved her deliverance, as her doorkeeper. About 70 of our companions were with us, and lodged in a place in the vicinity of that garden. We fell ill one day, and were confined to bed. Tahiri sent a request to call upon us. We were surprised at her message, and were at a loss as to what we should reply. Suddenly we saw her at the door, her face unveiled before us. How well has Mirza Akajan commented upon that incident. And a footnote here says of Mirza Akajan, Baha'u'llah's amanuensis. The face of Fatimi, he said, must needs be revealed on the day of judgment, and appear unveiled before the eyes of men. At that moment the voice of the unseen shall be heard, saying, Turn your eyes away from that which ye have seen. How great was the consternation that seized the companions on that day! Fear and bewilderment filled their hearts. A few, unable to tolerate that which was to them so revolting a departure from the established customs of Islam, fled in horror from before her face. Dismayed, they sought refuge in a deserted castle in that neighborhood. Among those who were scandalized by her behavior and severed from her entirely were the Syed Inari, a footnote here says Mirza Muhammad Ali-i Nakhri, and his brother Mirza Hadi, to both of whom we sent word that it was unnecessary for them to desert their companions and seek refuge in a castle. Our friends eventually dispersed, leaving us at the mercy of our enemies. When, at a later time, we went to Amul, such was the turmoil which the people had raised that above 4,000 persons had congregated in the masjid, and had crowded on to the roofs of their houses. The leading mullah of the town denounced us bitterly. "You have perverted the faith of Islam," he cried in his Mazindarani dialect, "and sullied its fame. Last night I saw you in a dream enter the masjid, which was thronged by an eager multitude that had gathered to witness your arrival. As the crowd pressed round you, I beheld, and lo, the Qaim was standing in a corner, with his gaze fixed upon your countenance, his features betraying great surprise. This dream I regard as evidence of your having deviated from the path of truth." He assured him that the expression of surprise on that countenance was a sign of the Qaim's strong disapproval of the treatment he and his fellow townsmen had accorded us. He questioned us regarding the mission of the Bab. We informed him that, although we had never met him face to face, yet we cherished nonetheless a great affection for him. We expressed our profound conviction that he had under no circumstances acted contrary to the faith of Islam. The mullah and his followers, however, refused to believe us, and rejected our testimony as a perversion of the truth. They eventually placed us in confinement and forbade our friends to meet us. The acting governor of Amul succeeded in effecting our release from captivity. Through an opening in the wall that he ordered his men to make, he enabled us to leave that room and conducted us to his house. No sooner were the inhabitants informed of this act than they arose against us, besieged the governor's residence, and pelted us with stones, and hurled in our face the foulest invectives. At the time we purposed to send Muhammad Hadi-i Farhadi to Qazvin, in order to achieve the deliverance of Tahiri and conduct her to Tehran. Sheikh Abu Turab wrote us, insisting that such an attempt was fraught with grave risks, and might occasion an unprecedented tumult. We refused to be deflected from our purpose. That Sheikh was a kind-hearted man, was simple and lowly in temper, and behaved with great dignity. He lacked courage and determination, however, and betrayed weakness on certain occasions. A word should now be added regarding the closing stages of the tragedy that witnessed to the heroism of the 7 martyrs of Tehran. For 3 days and 3 nights they remained abandoned in the Sabzi Maidan, which joined the imperial palace, exposed to untold indignities which an unrelenting foe heaped upon them. Thousands of devout Shias gathered round their corpses, kicked them with their feet, and spat upon their faces. They were pelted, cursed, and mocked by the angry multitude. Heaps of refuse were flung upon their remains by the bystanders, and the foulest atrocities were perpetrated upon their bodies. No voice was raised in protest, no hand was stretched to stay the arm of the barbarous oppressor. Having allayed the tumult of their passion, they buried them outside the gate of the capital in a place which lay beyond the limits of the public cemetery, adjoining the moat between the gates of Nor and of Shah Abdul Azim. They were all laid in the same grave, thus remaining united in body as they had been in spirit during the days of their earthly life. The news of their martyrdom came as an added blow to the Bab, who was already plunged in sorrow at the fate that had befallen the heroes of Tabasi. In the detailed tablet he revealed in their honor, every word of which testified to the exalted position they occupied in his eyes. He referred to them as those very 7 goats, spoken of in the traditions of Islam, who on the day of judgment shall walk in front of the promised Qaim. They shall symbolize by their life the noblest spirit of heroism, and by their death shall manifest true acquiescence in his will. By preceding the Qaim, the Bab explained, is meant that their martyrdom will precede that of the Qaim himself, who is their shepherd. What the Bab had predicted came to be fulfilled, inasmuch as his own martyrdom occurred 4 months later in Tabriz. That memorable year witnessed, in addition to the martyrdom of the Bab and that of his 7 companions in Tehran, the momentous happenings of Neyriz, which culminated in the death of Vahid. Towards the end of that same year, Zanjan likewise became the center of a storm which raged with exceptional violence throughout the surrounding district, bringing in its wake the massacre of a vast number of the Bab's staunchest disciples. That year rendered memorable by the magnificent heroism which those staunch supporters of his faith displayed, not to speak of the marvelous circumstances that attended his own martyrdom, must ever remain as one of the most glorious chapters ever recorded in that faith's blood-stained history. The entire face of the land was blackened by the atrocities in which a cruel and rapacious enemy freely and persistently indulged, from Khorasan, on the eastern confines of Persia, as far west as Tabriz, the scene of the Bab's martyrdom, and from the northern cities of Zanjan and Tehran, stretching south as far as Neriz in the province of Fars. The whole country was enveloped in darkness, a darkness that heralded the dawning light of the revelation which the expected Hussein was soon to manifest, a revelation mightier and more glorious than that which the Bab himself had proclaimed. Chapter 22. The Neriz Upheaval. In the early days of the siege of the fort of Tabasi, Vahid was engaged in spreading the teachings of the cause in Burjird, as well as in the province of Kurdistan. He had resolved to win the majority of the inhabitants of those regions to the faith of the Bab, and had intended to proceed from thence to Fars and there continue his labours. As soon as he heard of Mullah Hussein's departure from Mazindaran, he hastened to the capital and undertook the necessary preparations for his journey to the fort of Tabasi. He was preparing to leave when Baha'u'llah arrived from Mazindaran and informed him of the impossibility of joining his brethren. He was greatly saddened at this news, and his only consolation in those days was to visit Baha'u'llah frequently and to obtain the benefit of his wise and priceless counsels. Vahid eventually determined to proceed to Qazvin and to resume the work in which he had been engaged. From thence he left for Qum and Kashan, where he met his fellow disciples and was able to stimulate their enthusiasm and reinforce their efforts. He continued his journey to Isfahan, to Artistan and Artikhan, and in each of these cities he proclaimed with zest and fearlessness the fundamental teachings of his master, and succeeded in winning over a considerable number of able supporters to the cause. He reached Yazd in time to celebrate the festivities of Nowruz with his brethren, who expressed their joy at his arrival and were greatly encouraged by his presence among them. Being a man of renowned influence, he possessed, in addition to his house in Yazd, where his wife and her 4 sons had settled, a home in Darab, which was the abode of his ancestors, and another one in Neriz, which was superbly furnished. He arrived at Yazd on the first day of the month of Jamadi-ul Aval in the year AH 1266, AD 1850, the 5th day of which, the anniversary of the Bab's declaration, coincided with the feast of Nowruz. The leading ulamas and notables of the city all came on that day to greet him and to offer their best wishes. Nawab-i-Razavi, the meanest and most prominent among his adversaries, was present on that occasion, and maliciously hinted at the extravagance and splendor of that reception. The Shah's imperial banquet, he was heard to remark, can scarcely hope to rival the sumptuous repast you have spread before us. I suspect that in addition to this national festival, which today we are celebrating, you commemorate another one besides it. Vahid's bold and sarcastic retort provoked the laughter of those who were present. All applauded in view of the avarice and wickedness of the Nawab, the appropriateness of his remark. The Nawab, who had never encountered the ridicule of so large and distinguished a company, was stung by that answer. The smouldering fire which he nourished in his mind against his opponent now blazed forth with added intensity and impelled him to satisfy his thirst for revenge. Vahid seized the occasion to proclaim, fearlessly and without reserve, in that gathering, the basic principles of his faith, and to demonstrate their validity. The majority of those who heard him were but partially acquainted with the distinguishing features of the cause, and were ignorant of its full import. Certain ones among them were irresistibly attracted, and readily embraced it. The rest, unable to challenge its claims publicly, denounced it in their heart, and swore to extirpate it by every means in their power. His eloquence and fearless exposition of the truth inflamed their hostility and strengthened their determination to seek without delay the overthrow of his influence. That very day witnessed the combination of their forces against him, and marked the beginning of an episode that was destined to bring in its wake so much suffering and distress. To destroy the life of Vahid became the paramount object of their activity. They spread the news that, on the day of Nowruz, in the midst of the assembled dignitaries of the city, both civil and ecclesiastical, Syed Yahya-i-Darabi had had the temerity to unveil the challenging features of the faith of the Bab, and had adduced for the purpose of his argument proofs and evidences gleaned both from the Koran and from the traditions of Islam. Though his listeners, they urged, ranked among the most illustrious of the mujtahids of the city, no one could be found in that assemblage to venture a protest against his vehement assertions of the claims of his creed. The silence kept by those who heard him has been responsible for the wave of enthusiasm which has swept over the city in his favor, and has brought no less than half of its inhabitants to his feet, while the remainder are being fast attracted. This report spread like wildfire throughout Yazd and the surrounding district. It kindled, on the one hand, the flame of bitter hatred, and on the other was instrumental in adding considerable numbers to those who had already identified themselves with that faith. From Ardikan and Manshad, as well as from the more distant towns and villages, crowds of people, eager to hear of the new message, flocked to the house of Vahid. "What are we to do?" they asked him. "In what manner do you advise us to show forth the sincerity of our faith and the intensity of our devotion?" From morning till night, Vahid was absorbed in resolving their perplexities and in directing their steps in the path of service. For 40 days this feverish activity persisted on the part of his zealous supporters, both men and women. His house had become the rallying center of an innumerable host of devotees who yearned to demonstrate worthily the spirit of the faith that had fired their souls. The commotion that ensued provided the Nawab-i-Razavi with a fresh pretext for enlisting the support of the governor of the city, whose name was Akka Khan, who was young and inexperienced in the affairs of state in his efforts against his adversary. He soon fell a victim to the intrigues and machinations of that evil plotter, who succeeded in inducing him to dispatch a force of armed men to besiege the house of Vahid. While a regiment of the army was proceeding to that spot, a mob composed of the degraded elements of the city were, at the instigation of the Nawab, directing their steps towards that same place, determined by their threats and imprecations to intimidate its occupants. Though hemmed in by hostile forces on every side, Vahid continued from the window of the upper floor of his house to animate the zeal of his supporters and to clarify whatever remained obscure in their minds. At the sight of a whole regiment reinforced by an infuriated mob preparing to attack them, they turned to Vahid in their distress and begged him to direct their steps. "This very sword that lies before me," was his answer, as he remained seated beside the window, "was given to me by the Qaim himself. God knows, had I been authorized by him to wage holy warfare against this people, I would alone and unaided have annihilated their forces. I am, however, commanded to refrain from such an act. This very steed," he added, as his eyes fell upon the horse which his servant Hassan had saddled and brought to the front of his house, "the late Mohammed Shah gave me, that with it I might undertake the mission with which he entrusted me of conducting an impartial investigation into the nature of the faith proclaimed by the Sayyidi Bab. He asked me to report personally to him the results of my inquiry, inasmuch as I was the only one among the ecclesiastical leaders of Tehran in whom he could repose implicit confidence. I undertook that mission with a firm resolution of confuting the arguments of that Sayyid, of inducing him to abandon his ideas and to acknowledge my leadership, and of conducting him with me to Tehran as a witness to the triumph I was to achieve. When I came into his presence, however, and heard his words, the opposite of that which I had imagined took place. In the course of my first audience with him, I was utterly abashed and confounded. By the end of the second, I felt as helpless and ignorant as a child. The third found me as lowly as the dust beneath his feet. He had indeed ceased to be the contemptible Seer I had previously imagined. To me, he was a manifestation of God himself, the living embodiment of the divine spirit. Ever since that day I have yearned to lay down my life for his sake. I rejoice that the day I have longed to witness is fast approaching." Seeing the agitation that had seized his friends, he exhorted them to be calm and patient, and to rest assured that the omnipotent avenger would ere long inflict with his own invisible hand a crushing defeat upon the forces arrayed against his loved ones. No sooner had he uttered these words than the news arrived that a certain Muhammad Abdullah, whom no one suspected of being still alive, had suddenly emerged with a number of his comrades, who had likewise disappeared from sight, and raising the cry of Ya Sahib uz Saman, had flung themselves upon their assailants and dispersed their forces. He displayed such courage that the whole detachment, abandoning their arms, had sought refuge together with the governor in the fort of Narin. That night Muhammad Abdullah asked to be introduced into the presence of Vahid. He assured him of his faith in the cause, and acquainted him with the plans he had conceived of subjugating the enemy. "Although your intervention," Vahid replied, "has today averted from this house the danger of an unforeseen calamity, yet you must recognize that until now our contest with these people was limited to an argument centering around the revelation of the Sahib-uz-Zaman. The Nawab, however, will henceforth be induced to instigate the people against us, and will contend that I have arisen to establish my undisputed sovereignty over the entire province, and intend to extend over it the whole of Persia." Vahid advised him to leave the city immediately, and to commit him to the care and protection of the Almighty. "Not until our appointed time arrives," he assured him, "will the enemy be able to inflict upon us the slightest injury." Muhammad Abdullah, however, preferred to ignore the advice of Vahid. "It would be cowardly of me," he was heard to remark as he retired, "to abandon my friends to the mercy of an irate and murderous adversary. What then would be the difference between me and those who forsook the Sayyidush Shuhada on the day of Ashura, and left him with his companions on the field of Karbala? A merciful God will, I trust, be indulgent towards me, and will forgive my action." 2 footnotes here of the Sayyidush Shuhada, the Imam Hussein, and Ashura, the 10th of Muharram, the day on which the Imam Hussein was martyred. With these words he directed his steps towards the fort of Narin, and compelled the forces that had massed in its vicinity to seek an inglorious refuge within the walls of the fort, and succeeded in keeping the governor confined along with those who were besieged. He himself kept watch, ready to intercept whatever reinforcements might seek to reach them. Meanwhile the Nawab had succeeded in raising a general upheaval in which the mass of the inhabitants took part. They were preparing to attack the house of Vahid when he summoned Syed Abdul Azim Iqui, surnamed the Syed Khalda, who had participated for a few days in the defense of the fort of Tabasi, and whose dignity of bearing attracted widespread attention, and bade him mount his own steed and address publicly through the streets and bazaars an appeal on his behalf to the entire populace, and urge them to embrace the cause of the Sahib-uz-Zaman. "Let them know," he added, "that I disclaim any intention of waging holy warfare against them. Let them be warned, however, that if they persist in besieging my house and continue their attacks upon me in utter defiance of my position and lineage, I shall be constrained, as a measure of self-defense, to resist and disperse their forces. If they choose to reject my counsel and yield to the whisperings of the crafty Nawab, I will order 7 of my companions to repulse their forces shamefully, and to crush their hopes." The Syed Khalda leaped upon the steed, and, escorted by 4 of his chosen brethren, rode out through the market, and pealed out in accents of compelling majesty the warning he had been commissioned to proclaim. Not content with the message with which he had been entrusted, he ventured to add, in his own inimitable manner, a few words by which he sought to heighten the effect which the proclamation had produced. "Beware," he thundered, "if you despise our plea, my lifted voice, I warn you, will prove sufficient to cause the very walls of your fort to tremble, and the strength of my arm will be capable of breaking down the resistance of its gates." His stentorian voice rang out like a trumpet, and diffused consternation in the hearts of those who heard it. With one voice the affrighted population declared their intention to lay down their sword and cease to molest Vahid, whose lineage, they said, they would henceforth recognize and respect. Constrained by the blank refusal of the people to fight against Vahid, the Nawab induced them to direct their attack against Muhammad Abdullah and his comrades, who were stationed in the neighborhood of the fort. The clash of these forces induced the governor to sally from his refuge and to instruct the besieged detachment to join hands with those who had been recruited by the Nawab. Muhammad Abdullah had begun to disperse the mob that had rushed forth from the city against him, when he was suddenly assailed by the fire which the troops opened upon him by the order of the governor. A bullet struck his foot and threw him to the ground. A number of his supporters were also wounded. His brother hurriedly got him away to a place of safety, and from thence carried him, at his request, to the house of Wahid.